Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
With a look at how markets are digesting the news we got out of Washington yesterday. Thank you so much. That more than 7% decline on GM right now. An American auto manufacturer, which, of course, is something that the president says he wants to see thrive, is American auto manufacturing. That, in part, is the reasoning why he made the announcement he did yesterday, when something he long has promised, tariffs on auto imports, were formalized.
This is the beginning of Liberation Day in America. We're going to charge countries for doing business in our country and taking our jobs, taking our wealth. What we're going to be doing is a 25% tariff on all cars that are not made in the United States.
Let's talk a little bit more about what this means with Bloomberg's Detroit bureau chief, David Welch. David, it's great to have you with us today on Bloomberg TV and radio. The way this works here, we're not just talking about foreign automakers. These are, in many cases, cars made by U.S. automakers that are assembled in other places. We saw data from Ward's Automotive and Barclays showing for Ford, that's 78% made in the U.S. Stellantis, 57%, GM, 52%. So we would presumably be tariffing the percentage of the vehicle that's assembled somewhere else. Is that right?
That's right. And that's why GM's one of the hardest hit by this as it's proposed, or as it's going to be levied right now. GM makes a lot of vehicles here, but they also make very, very important models like Chevrolet Silverado, GMC Sierra pickup trucks in Canada and Mexico. Their cheapest vehicle, their entry-level Chevy Trax SUV, made in Korea, that would be hit with a 25% tariff. On the Mexican and Canadian vehicles, those are USMCA compliant. That's the trade deal between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. Mm-hmm. They will have tariffs levied on the non-US content of those trucks. So let's just say a Silverado pickup was, and I'm just making this up, but if it was half US made parts, the other half of the value of that truck would be hit with the tariffs, and that can still be a substantial amount of money that's added to the cost of this vehicle when it comes across the border. And then whether consumers pay it or GM eats it or somewhere in the middle remains to be seen. But it's a situation where all the automakers are kind of scrambling to figure out how they're going to manage this. Toyota, half of the vehicles they sell in the U.S. are imported, some from Canada, but a lot from Japan. They're going to really have to struggle to kind of to deal with this if it's going to be long term.
Well, David, I want to expand more on what you were just saying about the question of who ultimately eats these higher costs. How confident are automakers right now in their pricing power, their ability to pass on higher input costs when we have signs of a softening consumer, at least softening consumer sentiment, and still relatively high interest rates?
You do, and you also have relatively high vehicle costs already. We had record new car prices about 2 years ago. They've come down a bit, but these are still historically expensive new vehicles out there. The average price of a new vehicle is not far from $50,000. 10 years ago it was in the 30s. So, there are expensive vehicles out there with high interest rates. That means high monthly payments. Consumers have been pushing back. You did start to see some activity with rebates and other deals, and you're seeing some of that now, but still big price tags in the showroom. So there's not a lot of places to bury these tariff costs. You will see some negotiating between car companies and their suppliers, maybe getting the suppliers to try to eat some of this cost, but their margins aren't very good. So, end of the day, the car companies themselves are either going to have to eat this, or they may decide not to make certain vehicles to sell in the United States if it's that bad and if the tariffs last a long time. I don't want to say anyone's doing that yet, but the tariffs would have to be a long-term thing before that happened. But these are sort of the options of decisions that car companies would have to look at.
Yeah, you're in a world where Honda, Subaru, and Nissan are assembling a greater share of their vehicles in the U.S. than General Motors itself. So this then becomes a question, if I'm hearing you right, about how long these tariffs stay in place. How long can an automaker wait around to find out?
Yeah, look, that's a big question. I think they will eat these tariffs for months, maybe a year or longer. It's just, it also depends on the conversations they're having with the Trump administration, and they're engaged on a daily basis trying to figure out where this is going. And the big question is, okay, if Trump's first term is any guide, do we just need to see the other countries he's negotiating with budge on some of the tariffs they have on the U.S., and at the same time, General Motors, Stellantis, Toyota say they're going to move a vehicle that's made overseas or in Mexico to a factory in the U.S.? Or do they open a new plant in the U.S.? Do they make a concession in that way where they're going to invest more here? We've seen Trump already talking up the fact that Apple is going to invest more in the United States. He talked up a $21 billion Hyundai investment that they announced a couple days ago. He likes to see these things. He likes to talk about them. So the concessions may be on two fronts. The countries, Mexico, Canada, the EU, who he's negotiating with, and then the companies here who he wants to see bring jobs and investment back. That may be the way that gets companies out of a long-term tariff structure that they find very difficult to operate in.
All right, David Welch, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Detroit bureau chief, helping us walk through the impact these tariffs could have on auto companies. But by extension, there also is a question as to how exactly these levies may help or hurt auto workers. And it was the impact on auto workers that the White House press secretary Caroline Leavitt was touting from the White House earlier today.
I would just like to emphasize these auto tariffs yesterday are a big deal for auto workers in the industry. And you saw the United Auto Workers Union, Sean Fain, who wasn't the greatest fan of the president on the campaign trail, came out this morning and applauded the president for this move, saying it's a great thing for auto workers who have been sold out by unfair trade practices.
Let's see if Jared Bernstein agrees, former director of the White House Council of Economic Advisors during the Biden administration, back with us on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Jared, good to see you. As always, obviously, during your tenure at the White House, we talked with you frequently about issues surrounding labor, including the UAW strike when it was ongoing. Is there an argument to be made here that those workers stand to benefit from the levies that were just announced?
I don't think so. And I've heard Ms. Leavitt argue that tariffs actually will make consumer goods cheaper, not more expensive. So I think some of this analysis is kind of upside down. In fact, it's widely agreed upon that tariffs are an import tax and that at least some share, and I think most research suggests the lion's share, is passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices. We have auto analysts out this morning suggesting that these new tariffs on autos, these sweeping tariffs on all auto imports and auto parts, will raise the price, the average price of a car between $5,000 and $10,000. That's real money for American consumers. And in that regard, I think Liberation Day is when American consumers are liberated from paying lower costs on imports, and I'm not sure they're going to like that.
It's good to see you, Jared. Welcome back. If this is Liberation Day, as the president is calling it, is he suggesting that at some point this tariff battle will result in no tariffs, a zeroing out of trade relationships? Is that not an admirable goal?
I do think that would be an admirable goal, but I'm not sure why you have to start a trade war to get there. That's kind of like it's saying an admirable goal is to make myself feel better by not banging my head against the wall. That's true, but probably a good idea not to start that in the first place. Look, all of this comes down to an idea that Dean Baker and I explored in an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today, where you ask yourself, even the administration, by the way, contrary to the spokesperson you played, even the administration says pain first, gain later. So really, I think their best argument is that these tariffs will eventually reindustrialize America. And I think that argument is just patently wrong. There's no evidence to support it, lots of evidence pushing the other way. Happy to take anybody through that argument. But I don't see pain first, gain later. I see pain first, pain later.
Well, so let's get into that a little bit more, because in that op-ed you mentioned in the Journal today, you say that even if U.S. manufactured exports increased enough to close the trade deficit, which you say is an extremely unlikely event, and if employment grew proportionally, our manufacturing workforce share would climb only from 8% to 9%, which obviously is not super dramatic. Jared, if this is not the means through which to have that manufacturing economy revival, what actually can juice it?
Yeah, really important question, Kailey. So first of all, that calculation is based on zeroing out the trade deficit. That hasn't happened since the mid-1970s. We can talk about whether that's something that policy should try to do. I happen to believe that there are times when the trade deficit is a clear drag on growth, and particularly on some of our manufacturing communities. So some of this impetus or motivation makes sense, which takes us to the second part of your question. We had even more success than I expected when it came to what was called our industrial policy in the Biden administration. We saw a doubling of factory construction on U.S. soil based much more on carrots than sticks. Tariffs, just these kind of broad-based tariffs, I actually think targeted tariffs can have a role, but these broad-based tariffs have never been shown to lower the trade deficit. They've never been shown, even if you do lower the trade deficit, for that to translate into more factory jobs. We had a lot more success tapping an untapped demand or elasticity for people who wanted to build factories in this country in the area of clean energy, electric vehicles, battery production. And when I say people, investors, I don't just mean American investors, I mean foreign investors. We had a surge in foreign direct investment. Now, many of those factories are underway. Those shovels are in the ground, and that's still ongoing. But that has proven already to be a lot more successful than the tariff strategy.
People spent the 4 years, many economists spent the 4 years of your time in the White House with Joe Biden, Jared, predicting a recession. And getting back to the no pain, no gain situation here, in your op-ed, you write, they failed to do so, continue to double down on their unpopular agenda. We may find ourselves testing Howard Lutnick's assertion that a recession will be worth it. So when does the recession begin?
Well, this is Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, saying, yeah, the policies that we're implementing, possibly could be recessionary, but it will be worth it because of the gains on the other side. And as I explained earlier, and as we go through in some detail in the piece, that's just a wrong argument with no historical backing, no theoretical backing. Every reason to believe pain now, pain later on that. As far as a recession is concerned, one thing going for the Trump team right now is that they inherited a strong economy, and at least as far as the hard data are concerned, it's still a very solid economy. I mean, I was looking at the UI claims this morning, and they're not even flashing yellow. And I think if you're not seeing layoffs in the labor market, then you're not really looking at recessionary conditions. Now, I also noticed that Goldman Sachs marked down their first quarter GDP estimate for this year, so the quarter that we that ends at the end of this month, to 1%. Now that's down from something like well north of 2 for Q4, and so that kind of a deceleration that really could be problematic in terms of the labor market. But at least as far as the hard data is concerned right now, the economy is still solid.
Well, so when we consider the domestic economy and how it will compare internationally, obviously the impact of tariffs, Jared, will not just be felt in the United States, but in comparison to countries that will have to be grappling with this, like Europe, for example, which in many places seems to be abandoning austerity entirely, getting ready to spend on defense and stimulate. The U.S. currently is trying to really rein in federal spending. No such stimulus appears to be on the horizon. How could that ultimately stack or make the U.S. impact be felt more acutely than even the impact on other countries that the president is currently trying to influence?
Well, first of all, the trade isolation, the American fortress will go it alone, I think is really antithetical to growth in the near term and in the long term. And I think if the president and his team were talking about a regional trade bloc, maybe North America, I think that maybe we could have a better conversation. But clearly, their actions and threats against Mexico and Canada suggest they're not even thinking in terms of regional trade blocs. And I think this is damaging for growth. And again, this is coming from a person who is well aware of the costs of persistent trade deficits and unfair trade on communities that have been left behind. In terms of fiscal pressure, I think we probably will see some fiscal worsening of the outlook from the tax cuts. And I suppose you could look at that and say, well, maybe there'll be some positive fiscal impulse there, some more spending. That's really a function of whether they're just extending existing tax cuts, which comes with no new fiscal impulse. That's just status quo in terms of its macroeconomic impacts, or whether they're adding new tax cuts. Now, if they add new tax cuts, which they have talked about, that could juice the economy a bit more, but of course it worsens the fiscal outlook even more, and I don't know how markets are going to love that so much.
He is former chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors. Now he's a free man. Jared Bernstein. It's great to see you back, Jared, on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Kailey, Leinz, I'm Joe Mathieu. We'll assemble our political panel coming up next on Balance of Power here on Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Thousands of people showed up to protest last evening in Somerville, Mass. If you're with us on 92.9 in Boston, this is a big local story here, and it's frankly become a big national story. If you're with us on YouTube, get a load of this. This is the scene right now on a street in Somerville, Mass, where a Tufts University student, Rumisa Ozturk of Turkey, was approached by plainclothes, masked police officers and promptly arrested. If I could play the audio, you'd hear her screaming at this point. They take her backpack off, put it on the ground, handcuff her, get her in a car, and drive her away. Widely circulated online here, this video, according to Ozturk's lawyer, is actually the property of the Department of Homeland Security. This is a 30-year-old from Turkey, Fulbright scholar, PhD in child study and human development on an F1 student visa at Tufts University. I guess we can hear it now. As you hear her try to talk her way, I guess, out of this, not sure who these people are. They do eventually identify themselves. They say, we are police officers, but they're not wearing uniforms. If we can start that, by the way, back from the beginning, you'll hear her reaction when she first sees these police officers approach her here. We just got an update. This is from the Boston Globe. Ozturk, who was detained by ICE agents, has already been moved to Louisiana. She had been moved to Louisiana by the time a judge ordered her kept in Massachusetts. The offense here, supporting Hamas. DHS and ICE investigations, this is according to an emailed statement from the Department of Homeland Security, found Ozturk engaged in activities in support of Hamas without sharing evidence of the claim or responding to questions about the video. Now, we're isolating this case here because we want to talk about optics, or as the great political producer Adam Belmar used to call polyoptics, a couple of clicks up on the satellite radio dial at POTUS. Polyoptics. When you consider something like this rolling on TVs across the country, on phones and computer screens, coupled with some of the other stories that we've been hearing. We've been talking about tariffs a lot here. A breakdown, for instance, in the Social Security Administration. Nobody's answering the phone. The website is crashing. Add the Signal chat room flap, and you start to create a composite here, an optical composite that is in itself a political character, a political issue. And that's where we start now with our political panel. Jeannie Shanzano is here, Bloomberg Politics contributor, and of course, senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. She's our Democratic analyst alongside Republican strategist Chapin Fay, founder, Lighthouse Public Affairs. Now, of course, Jeannie, you're an educator, you're a political science professor at Iona University, and what's happening on college campuses like this is not an isolated incident, is something that has the attention and has brought much outrage from Democrats. If you could see the statements from the mass delegation following this protest last night in Somerville, what is the optical residue? What's the impact of this politically?
Yeah, I mean, the Ring camera footage that you're showing is utterly chilling, and you just played it. You can hear it. It's all over the internet. We have to take a step back and, of course, say that we do not know, and this is part of the problem, if she was indeed or is being charged with aiding and abetting Hamas. that would be illegal and that could get her detained and thrown out of the country. The problem here is that all people know is that she co-authored, she's a PhD candidate, and she co-authored an editorial in the student newspaper last March, which did not mention Hamas. It took on the administration at the university, and it was calling for them to divest from their connections with Israel. And it was talking about her concern about the Palestinian people that had been killed. And so the concern is that they are taking people up off the street and throwing them in jail without due process because of their political views. So that is the concern. And that's why we're seeing, these 1,000+ people out in Powder House Square who are calling for her to at least be brought before a judge and charges against her be made explicit.
The Mass Attorney General, Andrea Campbell, said, quote, "It looked like a kidnapping," unquote. Senator Ed Markey, of course, Democrat from Mass, quote, "Trump sent masked law enforcement officers to arrest Rumeysa Ozturk, a Tufts University grad student with legal status, without a criminal charge," unquote. Chapin Fay, what's your thought on this? Is the impact corrosive, or is this, in fact, going to help Donald Trump politically because he's doing what he said he was going to do?
I'll tell you what's corrosive. Speaking of kidnapping, there's still an American in captivity in Gaza. They have the remains of other Americans that they refuse to release. Hamas is a terrorist organization, and if you are here on a student visa, you are a guest in this country. If you are supporting Hamas, a terrorist organization, and making your fellow students feel unsafe on campus, you got to go. That's plain and simple. We talk about, outrage from Democrats. Donald Trump sneezes and you get outrage from Democrats. So I think we have to go down a little layer here, right? There will be due process for this woman. They will have to show some evidence of what they're alleging, right? And that will play out. But if you are a guest in this country and you are supporting terrorist organizations and calling for death to America or whatever else all these Hamas supporters are doing, you should absolutely be sent back home.
Well, you just said a couple of important things, though, Chapin. If, in fact, there is due process, that changes the story. That's one of the points of criticism here. This is somebody who so far has not been charged. But are we in a world in which a student op-ed results in a visa being canceled?
I don't know, right? I don't know. Like Jeannie said, we don't know what the evidence is or if there's evidence there. And of course, if there's no evidence and she's just a student who wrote an editorial, then she should maybe be able to stay. The United States government in America gets to pick and choose who gets access to this country. This is the whole point of what's going on. And you're seeing some real world implications happen. And, it's not pleasant, right? But it's also not pleasant that American Jewish students are getting harassed. It's like Nazi Germany. The left likes to call Republicans Nazis, but we're not the ones who are preventing Jewish students from entering buildings, taking over administrations in a violent manner, and then asking Jewish students for papers. This is all preposterous. If there's any shred of evidence that she has any connection to Hamas, I mean, you're seeing here in New York, right? The Columbia group that has been doing these protests and have been taking over buildings was reactivated after being dormant moments before October 7th. I mean, that needs to be investigated. This is absolutely preposterous. It's outrageous. And if you are actively calling for death to Americans and you are not a citizen and you are here as a guest, you got to go.
I completely appreciate the spirit of what you're saying here, Chapin. The fact is, though, we wanted to know what would happen when this stuff started happening. Forget mass deportations for a minute. In this case, targeted student protesters on campuses, just like people wondered, what will be the impact of family separations if that starts to happen again? Jeannie, seeing sometimes changes perceptions. Does seeing this video change the way you're looking at this?
It doesn't change the way I am looking at it, but certainly it can change people's views, and nobody knows that better than Donald Trump. I mean, he went on Meet the Press right when he was elected, and he said that. He told them that this is a concern. But let's just take a step back and let's just all agree that this particular woman has been accused of nothing yet that we know. There is no evidence she intimidated anybody, let alone a Jewish student. There is no evidence that she did anything to support Hamas. All we know is she was picked up off the street, and she was a co-author of an op-ed in a student newspaper last year, which talked about the need to think about the Palestinians being killed, and also asking her own university to divest from Israel. That is free speech. That is not unconstitutional. Now, obviously, if there is evidence that she is colluding with or materially supporting Hamas or any other terrorist organization, that would be a different story. But the concern of the people protesting today is that she has not been produced or charged yet. She needs to be, that's what the judge called for, and I'm sure she will be, but she was taken very quickly out of the state to Louisiana. And so all of this is concerning when it's looked at in total. These, the concerns that you're hearing out there about kidnapping and otherwise. This young woman is a Fulbright scholar, a PhD candidate, and we need to be very, very careful how we treat people coming into this country. And so I do think there is a chilling effect, even in these cases where you would prove this stuff in the end. In this case, nothing has been proved.
The op-ed we're talking about was in the Tufts Daily last March. She identified herself as a graduate student for Palestine. They called for Tufts administrators to acknowledge the Palestinian genocide and disclose its investments, to Jeannie's point, and divest from companies with direct or indirect ties to Israel. The op-ed makes no mention of Hamas. So getting back to your point, Chapin, if there in fact is some evidence here, at some point the administration will need to make this public, no?
Of course. And I would have liked to agree. I am personally a First Amendment absolutist. However, let's take an even farther step back. Should we be giving visas and student visas and guest visas to people who advocate for organizations that have Americans currently in captivity? I don't think so.
So this comes back to the actual attainment of the visa. This person shouldn't have been allowed to come here to study, is what you're saying.
Well, I'm not making that judgment, but I think that's an argument and a discussion that needs to be had at a higher level, right? I mean, it is a privilege, not a right, to immigrate to this country. And I'm not anti-immigrant. We all come from immigrants. It makes this country amazing, sure, right? That's the whole point of America. But open borders doesn't work, right? There are students who have left Columbia and these colleges because they are unsafe. And if you ascribe any other ethnicity or national origin other than Jewish or Israeli, we would be having a very different conversation about people who have been put in jail for making other students unsafe. But we're not. We're having a conversation about the right of someone to protest him on behalf of a terrorist organization.
Got less than a minute left here, Jeannie. University officials say they're in contact with authorities. They hope Rumeysa is provided the opportunity to avail herself of her due process rights. Is there a legal path for the school, or you just have to watch and see what happens?
Yeah, the university said they were not privy to any of this information. And so they seem to be sort of maintaining a watchful eye. I think, again, on behalf of this student, we must say we do not have evidence yet that she was protesting in favor of Hamas. Even if she was, that may be considered political speech, because what's illegal is material support, not speech. But so far, and you said this, Joe, the op-ed, which I read, did not mention Hamas, nor do I have any evidence, nor has the government produced some, that she was protesting in favor of Hamas.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts, or watch us live on YouTube.
As we cover politics in the nation's capital, thanks for being with us on the Thursday edition of Balance of Power. Kailey, we were just talking about the potential for Elise Stefanik to either withdraw her name from consideration to be the country's ambassador to the UN, or maybe delay that confirmation because of the super thin majority in the House. We're not done with all the confirmations here. In fact, there's an important hearing taking place today. Former Republican SEC Commissioner Paul Atkins having his moment in the sun here, in a hearing that veered into a lot of different issues, including conflict of interest. Part of his opening remarks from earlier. Let's listen.
Unclear, overly politicized, complicated and burdensome regulations are stifling capital formation, while American investors are flooded with disclosures that do the opposite of helping them understand the true risks of an investment. It is time to reset priorities and return common sense to the SEC.
So a lot of the hearing did focus on what he would do at the SEC in terms of the regulatory landscape it could create when it comes to things like crypto, for example. But some of the hearing as well focused on the man himself, Paul Atkins, who after his previous tenure at the SEC that Joe just mentioned, went on to run Potomac Global Partners, a firm based here in Washington that had a lot of Wall Street clients. That's where the conflict of interest concerns come from that we heard about in the hearing today. And watching all of it with us here on Bloomberg TV and radio is Lydia Bayoud, who covers regulation for us here at Bloomberg. So, Lydia, obviously the conflict of interest concerns we heard, for example, the ranking member, Senator Elizabeth Warren, highlighting extensively. Ultimately, though, that isn't expected to tank his nomination.
Not at all. He's got really strong support. And even Warren was by far the most kind of aggressive of the Democrats going after that record. It was touched on by a number of other Democratic lawmakers. But certainly he's got very strong support from Republicans who see him as sort of uniquely well qualified to run the agency, and especially at this time between all that's happening in capital markets and within government. His
personal assets valued at more than $328 million. He owns $6 billion worth of Bitcoin. This is, by the way, between Atkins and his wife. He will be divesting from some of these investments or all of them?
He'll be divesting from the majority of them in a letter that he sent to Senator Warren today about some of her concerns with his recusals and ethics. He said he was divesting from, I think, at least 150 investments. But now his wife is an heir of the Tamco roofing family, so they have some kind of family personal wealth. He is keeping a trustee of many of the family trusts. So there are assets that he is keeping, but he said that he's met or exceeded sort of the standard requirements for someone who's going to be in this role.
Well, and of course, those assets are dwarfed in comparison to the assets of, say, Elon Musk, who he was actually asked about in the hearing today. Didn't want to comment on the SEC's actions against Elon Musk, but talked about Doge.
It's true, yeah. He was asked sort of, would you go along with Doge if they come to the agency? And he said, yes, I would, certainly. And he'll be looking at whether or not the SEC is being a good steward of taxpayer money and how kind of like their mission fits in with what's required by Congress.
Great to have you back with us. Lydia, thank you so much, making it clear that he won't have any trouble, it looks like, at this point, Kailey being confirmed. Thanks for joining us today on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. As we bring you back to the Signal story that we've spent so much time on this week, we heard from Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary at the White House, about this a bit earlier today as this story moves into a fourth day now after The Atlantic actually published actual excerpts from the texted attack plans that the press, or I should say Secretary of Defense, put on Signal. Let's listen to the press secretary.
Well, we have never denied that this was a mistake, and the National Security Advisor took responsibility for that. And we have said we are making changes. We are looking into the matter to ensure it can never happen again.
And this is where we start our conversation, Kailey, with Denver Riggleman. We've been talking with a lot of different voices on this story, voices of experience. Denver, of course, former Republican congressman, but also is steeped in technology. He's started an AI company, spent a lot of time working as an intelligence official in the United States Air Force, and he's with us now back on Bloomberg TV and radio. I hope I framed your resume properly here, Denver, because you have unique insight into what happened here with regard to whether this was in fact classified information, whether there was some sort of hack or a media hoax, because we're hearing all three in Washington right now. What do you think?
Well, then thanks for having me on. I was listening to the prior segment, and I think some people are rethinking their Senate confirmation votes after what you've seen with this Signal debacle. And, my background, you did couch it pretty well, Joe, and great to be here with Kailey, too. Here's the thing. I was an Air Force mission planner. And when I said I actually deployed on multiple mission ops, was trained on F-15s and F-16s, B-1s, probably mission planned more strikes than everybody on that panel has seen or done in their lifetimes. And for anybody to say that this was a hoax, number one, it's impossible with Signal. Nobody can sneak onto there. It's obvious that Mike Waltz already had Jeff Goldberg in his contacts. Someone probably was talking to him previously, which I pointed out before, right? That he probably was leaking or talking to Jeff Goldberg on some other thing, which is why he's so violently aggressive in pushing these conspiracy theories. But also when you look at what happened on that Signal chat, when you're looking at time over targets, when you're looking at specific type of airframes, when you're looking at a specific mention of the target, all that is at the minimum secret or collateral level. It's ludicrous to say that they weren't actually talking classified on those threads, especially when it was that far out from the strike. If you can imagine somebody else being added that maybe wasn't as ethical as Jeff Goldberg, what our enemies could actually do. Because if you know the airstrike or the platforms, you can infer the weapons platforms that they're actually carrying. So I find it laughable. And anybody who's been in ops, real ops like I have, in the United States Air Force or on the ground, or Marine Corps pilots, Navy pilots, Army pilots, they understand that time over targets, specific payloads or specific aircraft, and the target itself would be classified.
Okay, well, Congressman, help us work through the argument that the administration is making that even if all of that were true, these plans were not compromised, or at the very least, not thwarted. This was a successful mission by all accounts, according to their telling, and that's why the president says this actually was no problem at all. What do you think?
You know, I find it interesting that they say it's no problem to have a leak from the SecDef at the highest levels. That was only by the good fortune that they had an ethical U.S. citizen that they had included on these talks to somehow say, just because we screwed up so badly that we could put troops in harm's way, and because it didn't, that means it's all hunky-dory. It's so ludicrous from an intelligence background, but also from a military background, but just common sense. Because when you look at what these individuals have pledged to do and how they've supposedly been trained and gotten all the security briefings, they broke so many protocols in this one incident. You wonder how many protocols they've broken in the past. You know, there's something in the military where we say past performance is indicative of future performance. How many other screw-ups have they done or they're going to do? When you have people who have no business being in positions of power, who don't have the expertise, the acumen, right, or the judgment, most of them conspiracy theorists or believers that the election was stolen. When you have people with that bad a judgment that are actually supposed to be holding security clearances, you don't want those individuals actually affecting operations based on their own bad decisions. And I think that's what we have right now is we have fantasy-based policy coming from the administration, but we have individuals that have been confirmed by the Senate, as you guys alluded to earlier, that really shouldn't be there. And I think when you have people who don't have the experience level or the acumen or the ability to plan correctly or can't follow directions or who don't know security, all of that together could be disaster for the United States. And I think what it indicates is that they actually could be the reason that the United States has a debacle in the future based on their performance today, and literally heads should roll.
Well, the thing is, I don't know. It looks like that might not happen here in Denver, and you might suggest otherwise. But the president is standing behind his team, and he's suggested there's nothing to see here. So is there a chance that there'll be a credible investigation led by Congress?
No, not going to happen. No. My guess is there's going to be an executive order allowing Signal tomorrow, to be used for classified operations, right? Or there's going to be some kind of preemptive pardon, for Signal users in the DOD. I mean, it's so ludicrous, and I think it's what's scaring our allies right now. And I think what people are concentrating on, the fact that the Signal, they invited somebody, they were discussing classified information, right on a comms channel that wasn't authorized. But it's also how do our allies think about how they were being spoken about. There's so many cascading effects here, Joe and Kailey, that it's hard for people that, have IQ above moron and common sense to grasp how this administration could defend this in any way. But we've seen this in the past. I mean, we've gone from where there's not going to be an investigation on this to reparations for J6, insurrectionists. So, let's not think that this administration is going to all of a sudden change their spots and have any kind of real adult in the room type of decision making when it comes to our troops in the field. And I think that's what it goes back to, is me being a military member. I just want to make sure that our troops in the field, the people flying those missions, our forward air controllers, those on the ground, all those are protected. And right now with this administration, what we saw with this debacle and releasing this information, I don't know if anybody in the military can feel 100% that this administration has the best interest of the military or our national defense in mind.
Well, and talk about the role our allies that you were just referring to play in ensuring the safety of the military, or at least the obtaining of necessary intelligence, because you talked about the way our allies were spoken about, the idea that Europeans are freeloaders and shouldn't be bailed out. It'd be one thing if they were simply offended. It would be another if they decided the U.S. is not trustworthy in terms of receiving and transmitting classified information and intelligence they may have otherwise shared with us. What would be lost if allies started holding back some of that material?
Oh, the first thing that's lost, it really is our ability to maneuver and massage events that are happening in a foreign affairs environment. And I think that's what scares the hell out of me, is that we don't have this ability to dictate or to look at our best interests or to be helpful. As sort of, listen, people might say, hey, Den, we don't know if it's a fantasy or reality, but we've looked at ourselves as sort of the moral do-gooders, the people that could come in, right, and give some of these security assurances to our allies. If our allies don't believe that, what happens next, right? And I think what they're seeing too is there's no truth and fact baseline to any of the decision making. It seems to be knee-jerk and based on fantasy, especially when you're looking at Ukraine. When I'm talking about air ops, Amy McGrath, Marine F-18 pilot, we're doing a new show, called Truth in the Barrel that's coming out, and we're talking about this exactly. The question you just asked, right, is how does all this actually affect our European allies, but how does this also affect Ukraine? Right, specifically. So how do we affect Ukraine now, Joe and Kailey? What is our position? J.D. Vance already made it clear when he was there before, right, that they don't even think Ukraine could be in NATO. I mean, it's just ludicrous to give up all of that sort of negotiating clout. So I think what you have is that the EU needs to look at going their own way. And I think you're seeing some of those positions when you're looking at Poland saying, hey, you know what, maybe we need to have our own nuclear program. Or you're looking at South Korea saying, hey, maybe we need our own nuclear program now. All the security assurance, nuclear assurances, all the weapons, all of our contractors, all of those decades and decades of building trust is broken immediately. And how do we get that trust back? So there's multiple cascading effects for the decision making and the hyperbole that's coming out of the administration.
Denver, we've only got a minute left. President Trump had said repeatedly that the platforms that are used now to share classified information are cumbersome. They're not efficient. They're not effective. That's why they had to reach for Signal. I just wonder, if from your technical background, never mind your political one, is it time for a new platform? Is there a classified friendly Signal, a government friendly platform that they need to start working on?
Listen, and I can't use all of the classified chats, but as back even in the middle of the 2000s, we had a secure chat called Jabber. You have secure chat all over the place, right? You don't need to absolutely go to Signal. You have encrypted phones. You have all that also. Are there things in the military that are absolutely bureaucratic and ridiculous? Yes, I was there. Gosh, I know Joe and Kailey better than most, right? Yes, but don't break the law or be stupid because you think something else needs to be used. Try to do better. And I think that's what it comes down to with military ethics and integrity. Use what you have, and if you have to change something in the future, then work towards it then.
All right, we'll leave it on that note. Former Republican Congressman Denver Riggleman, also former Air Force intelligence.
Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.